Hi there, I'm Kevin. I'm a solutions engineer at Codemagic. I'd just like to thank you all for joining today's webinar, where we're going to be talking about setting up CI/CD for multiple build environments. You can probably see there's chat, so I see some of you have told me that the sound wasn't playing, so yeah, I realised that after I started. Let me know where you're all watching from. Be interesting to hear where you all are. We're going to have some pre-recorded material for you, but I will be here to answer any questions that you might have. So feel free to ask in the chat any questions you've got. If I can answer those questions, then I'll do so in the chat. And if not, feel free to leave a comment after the stream's finished or send me an email to kevin@nevercode.io, or you can use the contact page on our website. I've put the link in the description of the video, so you should be able to find it. This evening's or today's material is going to be related to setting up an app in Flutter, but what I talk about can be applied to native iOS, native Android, React Native, anything where you can build different versions of your app or do white labeling. So hi to Michael in Germany. Hi there, Leela in Mountain View, California. Great to hear from you. Okay, so I'm going to start the material, and if you've got any questions, as I say, during the playback, then I'll try to answer them, and then I'll reappear towards the end of the video and see if I can answer anything else for you. Hi there, Gianfranco. Okay, I'll see you guys in a bit then. Hi there, I'm Kevin from Codemagic, and thank you for joining this webinar. We're going to be talking about setting up CI/CD for multiple build environments. We'll start off by looking at why developers use multiple app flavors. We'll then discuss how one app can be used to build multiple versions of an application. We'll then talk about how Codemagic can be used to build multiple flavors and schemes of your applications. And then we'll just have a look at a sample workflow to explain how this all works. So why do developers use multiple flavors? Well, it's often the case that they will have a base application and they want to create different versions of that application, whether it's a development version, a staging version, or a production version. And each one of those can have its own individual bundle ID or package name, which can be installed on the same device, whether that's for testing, the application itself. It might be that you have different API endpoints that you're using for the development version, and you don't want to use that when using the production version, for example. And it's also possible that you need to localize your application for different languages, or that you've got one base version of your app that you are creating multiple client applications for. So if you're using one app to create multiple flavors, it's possible that you're creating white label applications where you take your base application and create client app 1 or client app 2, client app 3. And you can easily change things like fonts and images, logos, and again the API endpoints that each of those applications points to. And overall, this saves maintaining individual applications for each of the client apps that you want to build. And using a CI/CD pipeline such as Codemagic, you can build those different versions quite easily, and you can publish them directly to the app stores such as Google Play or Apple App Store. So some of the main parts of the CI/CD pipeline or workflow involves the following. So we have the workflow that needs to be set up, and this can be done in such a way that you have one workflow per version of the application, which can get a bit cumbersome if you've got tens or hundreds of different versions that you're building. Or we can use a single workflow that can be given the information dynamically to build the specific version that you want to use. And that would be done in conjunction with the Codemagic API, which we'll discuss in a second. Now, to trigger the build of your workflows, there's various mechanisms that can be used, such as when you commit code to the repository, we can say to the pipeline to look for the push event, or it could be that you have a tag that you've put onto the commit, or it could be that you're running a pull request, or we have a new functionality called a conditional trigger, which will observe for changes to files in a specific folder or particular file changes to trigger a build. You can also trigger builds using the Codemagic API, and we can send an API request with a payload that contains specific environment variables that can be used in the workflow to trigger a specific version to be built. And this allows us to use significantly less code in the workflow and just use one single workflow to start our builds. Now, when people are building multiple versions of their apps, if they're building tens or hundreds, then it's important that they can do this quickly, and this is where the performance comes into play. So being able to build concurrently or using parallel builds is quite important, and supported by Codemagic, you can scale on demand and add additional instances where necessary. Additionally, then if you need to have quicker builds, then you can choose from our premium machines such as Mac Pros or the premium Linux instances, which just build your apps quicker. So let's have a look at this in practice and take a look at a sample workflow and how this all hangs together. Okay, so let's start by having a look at what we mean by different flavors. So over here on this iPhone simulator, I've got two versions of the same application that have been built with Flutter, and obviously this is the iOS version. So I've already installed the dev version of the application, and really the only things that I've changed here are the image assets, the colors, and the wording here. So that's the development version, and this is the production version. So you can see here I've just changed the color scheme, we've got the word production there, and we have two versions of essentially the same application. So in Xcode we've set up various schemes. So we've got a dev and a prod scheme, and all I've done is changed a few things such as the image assets. So you can see here that I've got my green dev icon and my blue production icon. So that's all the app does, but to build this and trigger these different versions of the application, we have to tell the build pipeline which version of the application that we would like to build. So if we go over to the YAML file, and this project is available up on our GitHub page. I'll make sure that the URL to reach this is available in the description, so you can have a look at how this is all configured as well. So basically, in the root of our repository we have our codemagic.yaml file, which is where we describe all of our build steps, and we can have multiple workflows, but for this one we have a single one. I've just called it iOS release. You can call it what you like, and I've specified some settings here, such as the type of machine that I'd like to build it on. So for an iOS app, obviously the quickest would be running on a Mac Pro. If you were building the Android version of this application, then you'd probably want to use one of the Linux instances that we provide. Down in the environment section, we're providing information so we can do automatic code signing and distribution to the App Store. So there's various pieces of information that we need in order to use the App Store Connect API. And here we've put in the encrypted values that represent the issuer ID, things like the app-specific password that's required for publishing, and private keys, for example. Now, what we have here is a set of environment variables that I've just put in a placeholder. I've put an underscore, and when I trigger the build using the Codemagic API, these values will actually be overwritten, and I'll give you that an example of that in a moment to show you how we pass those values. Let's have a look at it now. So if we go into this scripts folder, I've got two scripts that I use to call the Codemagic API and pass those values. So you can see here I've got some environment variables that when I make a curl request to the Codemagic API, passing in my API key that I've got set in my local environment variable on my machine, I tell it which app that I would like to build, the workflow ID, which branch I'm building, and then pass in these different variables including the bundle ID, which Xcode scheme I'd like to build, and which config. And you can see that that corresponds with the values that we have here. Other things that we can do is set the different versions of software that we're using to build. So in this instance, I'm using Flutter 2.05 and using Xcode 12.5. From there, we will then run through the scripts that build the application. So important things to note here is how we're passing through environment variables, which were provided when we called the API, and then I'm using that bundle ID to use one of Codemagic's CLI tools, which will connect to App Store Connect and fetch the signing files required to sign the application. So it will get the distribution certificate and provisioning profile that match the bundle ID, and allowing us to automatically sign the application. There's various other commands here, such as adding those certificates to the keychain and the profiles set up within Xcode, and then we run the appropriate build command for this application, and here we will automatically get the latest version that's been published to test flight and then increment that build number by 1, so we make sure that we're adding a newer version each time that we publish. Then further down in the process, we gather the artifacts. So in this instance, we want to publish the IPA file, and we can then continue through the workflow and notify people. So here I've put my email address to be notified when the build's complete and whether it's a success or a failure. And I've also added the publishing information that allows us to publish directly to App Store Connect. So in this case, we require the Apple ID email that you use and set up an app-specific password on that Apple ID account, which allows CI/CD systems to publish directly using the App Store Connect API. So this could be achieved using multiple workflows, but you can see here just using one. If I want to trigger a build, let's open up the terminal and then let's do this command. and then this should initiate the build for me. Okay, and let's have a look in the Codemagic web app to see if the build's running. And we can see here that the build is being prepared and has been triggered via that API request. And we can see on the left hand side here the machine type, the branch, when it was started, and where we currently are in the app build process. During each part we can expand a section to see the log information, and it seems that here the build is failing because we haven't specified lib main.dart. Okay, let's switch back into VS Code, and I think the problem is to do with the build command here, because we're specifying a flavor but we're not telling it which Flutter entry point to use. So we've got either main_dev.dart or main_prod.dart. So what I think we should do is pass that in as an environment variable. So let's just create a new one called entry point and just set that to an underscore. Let's copy that value and then say new line and pass -t to specify the entry point and add that in as a variable. Okay, and then let's modify our script that calls the API, and let's add in entry point, and let's say that this one will be in the lib folder main_dev.dart, and save that, and let's commit that. Okay, let's clear and then let's run. So let's run build dev. And let's switch back to Codemagic. Our build is preparing already. Let's see what happens this time. Okay, so it looks happier with the build command. It's running the Xcode build, and we can leave that to finish off the build and then go through the publishing step, and that should work nicely. Okay, and now it's succeeded. It's proceeding to the publishing phase. Okay, so the build's finished. It's published to the App Store, and let's just quickly check that by opening up the application in TestFlight. From here we should see that we've got our dev version, which I did change the color of the icon at some point, so it does match what we have on the iPhone here, and that's ready for distribution to our test users. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar demonstration. And if you'd like to have a look at the sample application, as I said previously, it's up on our GitHub page in our sample applications repository. The link will be in the description of this video, so please take a look. If you have any questions or want to get in touch with me, then my email address is kevin@nevercode.io. So please feel free to reach out with any questions you might have about building multiple flavors or schemes of your applications using Codemagic. Thanks again, and bye-bye. All right, guys. Hopefully you were able to see what was going on there. Maybe next time we'll make the text a bit bigger. Thanks for the feedback in the chat there. Hi France, how you doing? And as I said, if you want to reach out to us, then you can get me by email, or you can go to our contact page on the website, or you can join the Slack community and ask questions there. And I think the most useful thing perhaps is to have a look at the demo project that we went through here in the webinar, which is up on the GitHub page, along with various other examples and samples that you can use to get started. So if there's no questions at the moment, so Lila's asking if we have a link to set up everything for the first time. I don't think there's a from scratch, but actually, if you look at the repository, there is something on there about setting up the Xcode project. I know for Flutter projects, some people use a dependency called Flutter Flavorizer, and that will actually set up the different flavors for you for your Android and iOS projects. If you don't want to do it manually. So we've had some people do that successfully. Or if you go to the flutter.dev site and do a search for flavors, then there's some links there that take you to various articles about setting up the projects to work with flavors. And I use those myself to work through it and find out how to configure the flavors in a Flutter project. So that might be helpful for you as well. Okay, so I think answering Lila's question again, she's asking, is there a checklist we can reference for Codemagic specifically? I think if you set up the flavors as recommended on some of these articles and the ones that are linked to specifically from the flutter.dev site, they will be fine. And then if you look at the sample project, everything's set up there that shows you how to build the specific flavor and how to pass the entry point in. So that should be enough to get you going. If you get stuck, then just reach out to us on the support Slack channel, which you should be able to get to from within the Codemagic web app. There's a question mark for help within the app, and then there's a link to the Slack community, so you can ask questions there about setting up flavors, or you should be able to work it out from there. Samit Singh is asking, how do we pass secret keys and can we encrypt them before passing to the build script? So the encryption takes place within the Codemagic web app. So if you've got any kind of API keys or files for that matter, like a JSON file, you can actually encrypt those within the Codemagic web app. And once you've done the encryption, which is locked to your account or your team and can only be decrypted on the Codemagic build server, you can then paste that into your YAML file if you're using YAML, which is then safe to check into a repository. If you're using the workflow editor, which is the UI approach, then when you add a value, you can simply expand the environment variables section, and you'll see that when you put a value in, there's a checkbox next to it where you can just choose to secure the value, which means it's going to encrypt it and then add it, and that will be perfectly safe to add your environment variables. Okay, any more questions from anybody? Okay. You're welcome, Lila and Samit. Thanks for your questions. It's really good. Okay, well, if there's anything else, then as I say, feel free to reach out to us or to myself directly if you want to ask anything about setting up white label apps, or you're planning to build versions of your apps at scale, then we should be able to help you out doing that with Codemagic. Okay, so thanks again, everybody, and goodbye for now. Bye-bye.